Oh, welcome back to Changing Scripts. This is Stephanie. I'm continuing on with my language learning classroom experience. Whew. Okay, so in part one of this explanation, I talked about learning German in high school. And the second part, I am moving on to college. Community college in... Where was it? Was that in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania? No, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. No, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I went to 3 community colleges, 2 of which were in Pennsylvania. 4! One was in Santa Monica, California, and the 4th one was in San Luis Obispo, California. Okay, it's a long story. Point being this. It was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I swear. I needed to take a language, and I already had this horrible experience from a high school language learning classroom, and I wanted to just get my language over with, and I was really, really hoping that the rumor that my first language was Italian would help me, and I took Italian class. This did not go well. I still... Even after the 2 years of German and 2 or 3 years after that of not studying any languages, I never developed skills in learning a language or learning anything like a language. So I still walked into the language learning classroom fully unprepared for the experience that was about to hit. And like many language learning experiences, the teacher started off with a lot of spoken language that wasn't written down, and a lot of long chunks of the language that I didn't have anything to hang on. And now, especially after doing this channel for 4 months, I understand how much of a visual learner I am. I wouldn't even just say language learner, a visual learner in general. And I understand that if I had written more down, or if I'd had the internet then, because let's face it, this is what, 1990, this is 1990, way pre-internet. Internet came in, what, 98, 99? So this is pre-internet, so we had our textbooks, and we had whatever we wrote down, and whatever he wrote on the board, and I do not remember him writing a lot on the board. However, I still wasn't the best student yet. This was my first semester in college, so I still had some bad habits of waiting for content to happen. So yeah, I still didn't have any skills. So thank goodness though, he was a really nice person. He unfortunately picked up on my last name pretty quickly because he was Italian himself. And so he had a little bit of a misconception at the beginning that I might, as I did, that I might actually be able to speak or understand some of the language. And we both understood pretty early on that that wasn't happening, and his expectations went away. Okay. He was a really, really nice person, which seemed a bit different than my high school teacher, who was not a mean person. She just didn't really seem to like students anymore. And I understand that. I have hit teacher burnout to the point where even when there were nice people in my classroom, I was kind of like, I just don't want to talk to students right now anymore. I just need this part to be done. So I get that, but he wasn't at that point. He seemed to still be a genuinely nice, wanting to communicate and wanting to help other people communicate in his, in a primary language of his. So he was still really enthusiastic and really funny, and super hand gesture friendly, which really resonated with me because my hands have always done this. If anything, I probably hand gesture less now than I did at that time, which was in my late teens. I've probably calmed that down because of various reasons. So try to think of this more magnified than it already is, and that was probably me 20, 30 years ago. Oh gosh, that is almost 30 years ago. Okay, anyway, forget time. Let's go back to the classroom. So it was a community college. It was a night class. There were a lot of people who had day jobs who were in there with me, which was a really nice environment because it was people who wanted who either wanted to learn or like me were trying to fill a requirement, but either way, we were all adults. So it was a very different mindset than just a few years before when it was like 14, 15-year-olds just trying to push through this requirement for 2 years. So it was a really different environment. We did a lot more speaking practice, a lot more partner practice. I remember we still did the grammar exercises in our books, but I remember us saying them out loud to each other, and I remember us saying them, not so much one, like the teacher would call on us and we would say them, I remember us saying them back and forth to each other, and then I don't so much remember us drilling as a whole group, like saying them together, but I do remember there being different pronunciation practices other than just, like before we had to produce it with each other. So I remember there being more oral practice. I, again, don't remember him writing a lot on the board, but that could be my memory. I don't remember doing particularly well in the class, but I do remember when we had to take written tests, feeling way more confident and feeling like I recognized much more of the language than I had in my high school language class, where I just felt absolutely overwhelmed. I could kind of hear, I remember this now, as I was taking the written test, I could kind of hear his voice saying the words on the page. So I think that's an indication of how much input we were getting in the classroom, which is a very different experience than the German class. And again, I don't know if that was my closed off nature to how we were learning German, or if it was just my teenagehood, or if it was the teacher or the classroom or just the high school in general. There were so many factors going on with that first experience. But by the time I got into that Italian language classroom, so much had changed, It was such a different experience. It didn't turn me on to language to the point of going on to take more language classes. I didn't take the second semester of Italian. I ended up transferring to the main campus of that community college in Harrisburg, which turned out to be a move for me from Lancaster to Harrisburg, and that really fell apart quickly. Then I took a year off to move to California and reestablish life there. So there's a lot of life happening between those. By the time I got back to languages, I picked a different language because I really wasn't, my hope with Italian of it coming back to me didn't happen, and I figured since that was the case, I might as well pick a language that I wanted to use, and at that point I was in LA. But that's the next video. So already from the German experience to the Italian experience, things got a lot better. As far as the classroom itself, it was just a regular classroom within the newer community college. There were, again, adult language learners there, and I remember it being a really friendly environment where people talked to each other as much as they could in Italian and in English, and people laughed and like talked before class and after class. And I remember there was this one older gentleman who kind of took me under his wing. He was a native Spanish speaker, and he had this really elaborate mustache. I'll never forget it. And I just thought he reminded me of one of my uncles so much, even though he was a Spanish speaker, not an Italian speaker. But he looked so much like one of my Italian uncles. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he really, really helped me with the pronunciation part, because I was deathly shy of speaking at that point. I had, that's a whole other bag. Yeah, I had a lot of hang-ups with speaking growing up because of different pronunciation things that came out of my mouth that sounded like they were probably remnants of New York or remnants of my parents' Italian. So I was really, really deathly shy of speaking in public, even if it was in a class, only in a classroom environment. And he really, really took me under his wing and helped me with the pronunciation part of what we were doing, and really, really helped build my confidence. And he was such a sweet guy. I wish I could remember his name. I really do. But now that I think about it, he was like a language learning daddy figure. Not in any sort of perverse way. He was just a super kind, sweet gentleman who was just very nice and encouraging. And between him and the teacher, it really, really changed. I went from having a very negative view of languages and language learning to at least a neutral, if not curious, view of languages. I still didn't think learning languages was for me. I still felt like the worst language learner in the history of the world, kind of like now. And I don't know if I'll ever shake that feeling, but I definitely felt the communication aspect of the language. I felt the community aspect of the language, and all of that. So it was a much, much, much better experience. My cell phone just gave me an indication that it's going to shut off anytime now, and I'm not sure why. I think it's burning out. So I'm going to end this because that's pretty much the end of the story. The next part will be when I talk about learning Spanish down in Latin America. All right, thank you so much. Please feel free to leave your language learning classroom feedback down below in the comment section. I'd love to know how you learn languages and if from one language learning experience to the next, anything changed for you. All right, thank you. It's at the end.